Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this session. I'm really happy to be here and to show you the content that we have been working with my team over the past few months. It's been a great ride, and so I hope that it will be useful to you. This is moving your database to Azure. In this session, I'm going to show you some options that you have if you want to go from your premises to Azure. And this is part of a learning path, which is called modernizing your applications to the cloud, which started with MOD20. I don't know if some of you have been to MOD20, where we started by moving web applications to Azure. And so in this session, we'll move the databases, and then we have further session where we are going to show you how to enhance your applications, monitor your applications, and then use DevOps. So here are already a few resources. If you want to take a quick snapshot of that, you can find the slides, but at the GitHub repo, you will also find some deployment templates which allow you to deploy these demos that you're going to see today to your own subscriptions and to try things out. We have everything scripted, all the demos are scripted, so you can reproduce that at home and try things out. So what I want to tell you is that it's really a great time to migrate to Azure for multiple reasons. First of all, we have more features than ever. We have multiple database systems. We have the possibility to have hybrid architectures where you have parts of your application in one database system, another part of your application in other. Plus, we have, of course, a lot of services around platform as a service, for example, serverless applications or app services or all kinds of things which allow you to enhance your application. But also, we have services to help you migrate. And so this is all part of the Azure Migrate. Here in this session, we are going to speak specifically about database migration using the Azure Database Migration Service. But we have a lot of services helping you to migrate everything. And finally, of course, by migrating to the cloud, then you get something which is global. You have the possibility to have your data in multiple locations, which is, of course, which is good for enhancing the reliability of your application. If one data center would start failing for some reason, because you know things happen, right? Physics happens, then we are going to just fail over to another data center, and your users are barely going to notice anything. Of course, it's also going to enhance the speed of access, to decrease the latency by putting the data closer to your users. And of course, Azure is also very secure, and so you have quite a lot of options to enhance the security of your data. So there are multiple reasons why people migrate to Azure. For example, your data center contracts expire, and now it's time maybe to rethink your strategy. How am I going to host my data in the future? Will I continue, renew my data center contract, or will I move to something else? Maybe you have acquired a company, or you have been acquired, and then suddenly you have maybe the challenge to have hybrid data architectures that you need to integrate together. And of course, on Azure, we support a number of database systems with some communication between those. Capacity need is a good one also. Maybe suddenly you have a product which is very successful, and then you need to respond to these capacity needs, to all those requests. So we are going to scale you up very fast. But then when the capacity disappears, because maybe, I don't know, it's vacation times, the holidays, maybe people are not at home so much, then we're also going to scale you down, and like this you optimize your costs because you pay for what you consume. Software and hardware refresh, leave that to our engineers. They are going to patch you if there are some security issues, if you want to have an upgrade. Security threats, of course. Like I mentioned, Azure is secure pretty much by default, which means that all your data is encrypted at rest, and then you have some possibilities also to encrypt during transport, for example, with TLS, SSL, etc. Compliance is a good one. Maybe you hear that from my accent. I come from Europe, and of course, in Europe, we have GDPR. We have all kinds of things which are also important for people in the US if you do any business with Europe. So we are going to give you some tools to ensure compliance. Application innovation, because we have a lot of features that you can use. And finally, software end of support. We're in 2019, which means that Windows Server 2008, SQL Server 2008 are pretty much at the end of the support, and maybe it's time to upgrade to something better, and possibly Azure SQL Database, for example. So on Azure, we have a lot of capabilities, and this is just a few examples that I want to show you. On the migration side, we have Azure Migrate, which is kind of the portal where you go to get started. And for example, Azure Site Recovery, which is a backup and restore mechanism, is still there if you want. But if you want something which is more powerful and more managed, then the Azure Database Migration Service is a great choice, and we'll talk a lot more about that in this session. On the application side, we have Azure App Services, for example, to enhance your web applications, to build your web applications. That runs on Windows and Linux. Maybe you have Azure Functions to add certain services very easily to your application in a serverless manner, etc., etc. Those are just a few examples. And finally, on the data side, I want to mention that we also support things like open source databases, PostgreSQL, MySQL, MariaDB, which can run on Azure Database. We have Azure SQL Database Managed Instance. I'll go more into that in a moment. It's a new offering, a new flavor, if you want, of Azure SQL Database, which is even more compatible with Azure SQL, with the SQL Server on-premise, than ever before. And finally, on the NoSQL side, I want to mention Cassandra and MongoDB, which are supported on Azure Cosmos DB, so you can use those APIs. And here too, we'll talk more about that in a second. The Azure Database Migration Service that I mentioned is a possibility to migrate from different sources on the left to different targets on the top. And as you can see, we support a number of sources, including AWS and Oracle. And here I'm going to demo how to migrate from MongoDB to Cosmos and from SQL Server on-premise to Azure SQL Database using the Azure Database Migration Service. It's a very nice managed service which is taking care of a lot of headaches for you. I want also to mention an innovative solution if you want to migrate, for example, huge amounts of data, or if the internet is very slow, or if you just don't trust the internet for the transport. You can actually order those physical data boxes. And as you see, we have different capacities. The heavy one is actually pretty heavy, right? So you roll it in your data center, and then you place the data on that, and then you press a button. It's going to switch the label to go back to our own data centers, ship it back, and then our own engineers are going to put the data on Azure. So this is a good way if you need really something else than really the internet to migrate. If you have big amounts of data, if you have some specific needs in terms of security, etc., everything is encrypted on the boxes. On the right-hand side, Databox Edge and Databox Gateway give you also possibility to run certain Azure services directly on your premises. So it's a good way to create a link between your premises and Azure, for example, to create hybrid architectures. All right, so Tailwind Trader, I'm sure you heard that name already a few times this week. Tailwind Traders is somebody who we help to work. And of course, they get big news this week, right? I'm sure you heard that, but Northwind was acquired by Tailwind Traders. And of course, Northwind, I'm pretty much sure that everybody used Northwind at some point in their career, right? It's an old institution, and they are very traditional. They run their data center pretty much under the CEO's desk. And Tailwind Traders is exactly the opposite, right? They are very modern, innovative. They are global. They want to go global. And so they want to move the databases to Azure. They want to move the whole application. So the architecture that we have, this is a view of the website that we are going to port. The architecture that we have before the move right now is a hybrid architecture, because my colleague earlier on, Jay Gordon, already moved the web application part to Azure. So what we have right now is that we have this web application which is on Azure. It's an ASP.NET Core application which is using React.js on the front end. And on-premise, we have some VMs. We have a Linux VM which is running MongoDB, and that's our shopping cart, so it's a NoSQL implementation. And then we have another VM, which is running Windows Server 2012, and this is running SQL Server 2012, and this is for the product description and every information around the products if you want. So what we are going to do is move that to Azure. And we are going to start here by moving the Azure SQL Database from SQL Server 2012 to Azure SQL Database single instance. And because we are using a fairly old version of SQL Server, we are going to do a small assessment before, just to check that all the functionalities are working properly. And we'll take care also of the shopping cart, because of course this is an important part, and here we don't want to change our application at all, so we are just going to move that to a Cosmos DB instance running Mongo APIs. Like this, the code on our application side is going to stay exactly the same, but then we'll take advantage of all the features of Cosmos DB that I'm going to demonstrate to you in a moment. So let's talk a little bit about Cosmos DB. It's a NoSQL solution, all right? So it's very flexible. It's for semi-structured data if you want. And this is a globally distributed service, which means that really from the start, we thought about Cosmos DB as being a service which is going to be replicated in multiple locations. And we support geolocated writes and reads. And so why do we do that? For multiple reasons. First of all, by having your data in multiple locations, you increase the reliability of your service, right? If one data center fails, then we're automatically going to fail over to another one. We are also going to select the data centers which is the closest to your users. And like this happens automatically. You don't have to do anything in your application. Like this, we reduce the latency, not just for the reads, but also for the writes. And that allows you to guarantee certain values, which we'll see in a moment, namely below 10 milliseconds for reads and for writes. Another nice feature of Azure Cosmos DB is that it is a multimodal database. And for example, we support accessing the data as key value, column family, document, graph, and we support multiple APIs. So this is a great scenario for a lift and shift scenario if you want, for a migration, because you don't need to modify your application. You can just migrate, choose one of those APIs when you create your Cosmos DB instance, and after that, the data is going to be accessed in exactly the same manner. Okay, so let's see a demo of that. So I'm going to show you how to migrate the shopping cart of our application to Cosmos DB. So first of all, what I want to show you is our website. Right? So this is an application service. This is the Azure portal where I'm managing all that. And here is a website. Maybe you saw it already a few times. You may notice that we added here on top a debug header, which is showing the source of the data. So we have SQL Server and Mongo Server. And those are IP addresses. Those are VMs which are running. And so one of the VM is a Linux VM. This is a shopping cart. So I'm going to show you quickly. I'm going to just SSH. And here I'm using the Cloud Shell, by the way, which is a great environment directly in your web browser, allowing you to use Bash or PowerShell. So I'm going to use this to SSH into my machine, entering the password. And here now I am inside my Linux machine. And if I type Mongo, you see that Mongo is running there. So basically, this is where my shopping cart is living at the moment. All right, I can close this. So let's see how it works. So I'm going to go here and log in, all right? .com, oops, .com, here, and my super secret password. Now I am logged into the shopping cart. I can go and navigate, for example, wooden commodes, right? We always need wooden commodes in one's house. I think we all agree, so I'm going to add this to the cart. And let's go back here to the source. I'm going to go so in plumbing section because I really need a few stoves. Because my wife and I like to cook together, so we need at least 2 stoves. So I'm going to increase the quantity here. And wooden commodes, I have a big house, so let's take 3 wooden commodes. So now I have my shopping cart, which is populated. And now I want to migrate this. So let's go to see the target of the migration. This is a Cosmos DB instance, which is running Mongo APIs. As you can see down here, I don't have any collection at the moment. It's empty. So I'm going to go to the database migration service. This is a resource in Azure, just like any others that you create by using the Create a Resource button. And I'm going to start by creating a new migration project. I'm going to call that MIG Mongo. And as you see, we have a number of places that we can migrate from, and those are the places that I showed you in the slides earlier on. So here in that case, I'm going to migrate from MongoDB, which means that the target, the only possible target here is Cosmos DB with MongoDB APIs. And here I have the possibility to choose a type of migration. So what is that? It's actually interesting. You have the choice between offline and online. And right now for the demo, I'm going to choose offline, but keep that in mind because later we'll come back to this and I'm going to tell you what is an online data migration. All right, so I'm going to take that. I am now ready to save and create. And now I need to configure my migration. So I'm going to select the source of the migration. I'm going to change to connection string mode. I have here a cheat sheet which has the connection string to my VM. All right, so I'm going to save that. Now the DMS is logging into my VM and checking that everything's running fine. And now I am going to select the target. Now here it's a little bit automated, which is really nice. I can say, okay, I want to migrate to this Mongo here, which is the one I showed you just before. It pulls the connection string automatically. And now it's going to ask me, what database do you want to migrate? What collections do you want to migrate? All right. So here I want to migrate the Tailwind collection, the Tailwind database, sorry, and I could here act on the throughput. For example, if you have big data sets and you don't want to choke the service too much, you can also do that here. Let's save this. Here, it tells me that it wants to migrate the cart, which is correct. It's going to create the collection because this collection doesn't exist on my target. Let's save this. And I just need to give a name to the activity itself. So I'm going to call that MigMongo as well. And now I'm pretty much ready to do my migration. This is a small DB in that case because I really have just one user at the moment. So it was very fast. Now it is complete. So now what am I going to do? I'm going to go into my application service. And I'm going to switch the connection string. So let's go down here into configuration. In a production way, you would probably put those values into Key Vault to be even more secure and more convenient. But here for the demo, they are here directly in the configuration. I'm going to go down to my MongoDB connection string. And then I'm going to take the new connection string, which I copied earlier from the portal. All right, let's paste this here. And so here, what's really interesting is that as you can see, if I go to the beginning, even though I am now on Azure, I am using still the MongoDB protocol because I'm using the MongoDB APIs here. So I'm going to click OK. Save, which is going to restart the web application, but basically here I don't have downtime, right? I'm just going to wait 1 minute more or less, and during that time, let's take a quick tour of our Cosmos DB instance. So now if I go here and refresh, because the migration worked, after a short while, you see that now I have a card collection which has been migrated. That's good. And let's take a quick tour of that. So connection strings, everything you need to connect to this Cosmos DB instance is here on the screen. And then if I go down, I have this replicate data globally tab, which is really interesting because this is where I can govern where my data is going to be. Right now, I'm only in Eastern US. It makes me a little bit uneasy because if anything would happen to that data center, then suddenly I have an issue. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select Western US. Let's put one instance to here, Brazil, because I have some customers there, as well as in Australia, and maybe Southeast Asia. Like this, I have a nice global distribution. And notice that this is working here for reads and for writes. So basically, when somebody in Singapore writes to the shopping cart, it's going to write locally in the shopping cart, and then the data is going to be replicated. You can choose the way that the data is being replicated. There is a menu for that, which is a default consistency here. Right now, it is configuring. It's going to start the replication process. And in your application, you don't need to do anything because basically the connection string points to a load balancer, and the load balancer decides intelligently which database, which data center it's going to hit. So the closest to your users. So that's pretty good this way. Default consistency, like I said, you have multiple ways. As you can see, we have 5 ways to replicate the data, and you can choose the one which is the best for you. If it's a little bit difficult to understand how the consistency works, we have some small videos here which are showing you quite precisely how the data works. Basically, it decides if you do like an immediate replication, which means that the write takes a little bit longer, or if you have a very fast write, but then you know that maybe it's going to take a few milliseconds for the data to be replicated everywhere. And finally, what I want to show you is the metrics tab, because, like I told you, we have some service level agreements in Cosmos DB. So here, if I go to the latency, for example, you see that we guarantee below 10 milliseconds. That's our service level agreement for a read, but also for a write. And so if you go here to this tab, you can monitor your DB. And if you see that we exceed those values, you can contact our support, and then we'll give you some money back if the fault lies to us. Here we have also an SLA for availability. For example, notice that we support 99.999% availability, 5-9ers. Right now we are at 100%, which is great. I really hope that someday we'll go to 100.0002% availability. You know, maybe in the future. So that's our Cosmos DB instance. So now I can go back to my website. I'm sure that by now the application has restarted. I'm going to refresh. Notice that now my shopping cart is coming from my Cosmos DB instance. The content has been migrated, all right? And I can prove that. I can go back to my Cosmos. Let's go into the Data Explorer, okay? And here it's going to show me the collection. And here I have a few documents. Since I have only one user here, I can safely say I'm going to go and check this document. This is here the document because it's MongoDB. It's stored as a JSON document. And I'm a total hacker. I don't want to pay $50 for a wooden commode, so I'm going to change the price to 5. Let's update. And if I go back to my website, you see that now it's $5 for a wooden commode, which is a really good deal. So I'm going to buy that immediately. So basically, you see that the migration has worked. It was pretty painless. Everything works as expected. And so I can go back to my Mongo VM, shut it down. But of course, there is a problem here. And I'm sure you noticed that if you, if you are experienced, which you certainly are. Here, I lost some data, right? Because I went to my Mongo, I showed it to you, then I did the migration. Then I spoke more. And then during that time, people kept shopping in the old database, right? I switched the connection string, and all that data was lost because I did an offline migration. And remember in the beginning, I told you, we have those modes. We have offline and online migration. That's what an online migration would avoid. When you do an online migration, the database migration service is going to keep the source and the target synchronized as long as it is running. So you can do your migration. Then you run maybe a staging environment of your website on the new data. You make sure that everything's running fine. When you're satisfied, you switch the connection string, and then only you can power down the Azure Database Migration Service because it's not needed anymore. So that's an online data migration with 0 downtime. Okay, here in that scenario, I would have had to go to my website, power it down for a moment, and I would lose customers because of the online data migration. All right, perfect. So that was the demo for the shopping cart migration. Let's go back to the slides. And so the first thing I want to tell you is that I think you understand by now that we have tons of learning possibilities, all right? If you go to microsoft.com/learn, so here we have a whole track for NoSQL data with Cosmos DB. You can go and check that out. You can gain some experience points. It's very nice in, maybe on Monday morning, you can decide who pays the coffee, for example, etc. So a little bit gamification. So a very nice experience here. And you can do those tracks without any account. You can do all that for free, of course. So let's talk about SQL, relational data. So here, we are going to check the migration first by doing an assessment. And the reason why we do an assessment is to get some peace of mind, if you want. So we are going to connect to the old database. We are going to say, I want to move that to an Azure SQL database, do an assessment, and tell me where I'm going to have some issues, all right? So I prepared a small video to show that to you. What's going to happen here is that I'm going to start the Data Migration Assistant, which is a tool that allows you to do this assessment. I'm going to create a new project. And you see that you can also do migration using that tool, but it's recommended only for small data sets. For bigger data sets, we really recommend going to the Database Migration Service, which is doing that in a managed way and which is not going to cause any issues there. I'm going to check the database compatibility as well as feature parity. So here I'm entering the details of my VM, IP address, authentication, connect, and then I'm going to say, all right, this is a database that I want to access. Here we go. We have just one database on this server, so it's really easy. start the assessment, and the assessment here has two phases. First of all, it's going to tell me if I have some feature parity issues, and here there is one service that I'm actually not using, but which is available on my on-premise server. It's SQL Server Reporting Services, so it tells me that this is not available in Azure SQL Database. So here I have two possibilities. In my case, it doesn't matter because I'm not using that, so it's fine. I can do my migration anyway. But if I was using that, I have the possibility to change my migration to Azure SQL Database Managed Instance. And we'll talk about that in a moment, which is something which is a new flavor of Azure SQL Database, if you want, which is more compatible than ever before, even with very old versions of SQL Server. It also costs a little bit more, so that's why I started here with Azure SQL Database Single Instance, and the Managed Instance is kind of my backup if you want. I don't have compatibility issues, so it's good. So basically, I'm ready to do the migration, but before we do that, let's talk a little bit about Azure SQL Database. We have a very nice momentum, 70 petabyte in size. It's this slide is already a couple of weeks old, so it's probably more by now. 37,000 databases migrated using the DMS, and way more using other methods as well. So you see that it's going pretty well for Azure SQL Database. This is a service we like, and we have this new flavor called Managed Instance. So let's understand what it does. First of all, it's generally available since last year, so it is enterprise ready. It's really a good service for enterprises. It is going to allow you to do a migration very, very easily because of the increased compatibility with SQL Server on-premise. On the other hand, it's also a fully managed service. So instead of migrating your SQL Server on-premise to a VM, for example, then you can migrate to a platform as a service where you have a whole lot of additional services around it, which I'm going to demonstrate in a moment. So if we go back to these phases of the migration, we did the assessment. In the migration, sometimes you need to, well, not sometimes, all the time, you need to rehost your data. That's what the migration is. Refactoring, at least changing the connection string. But with SQL Managed Instance, you don't need to re-architect or rebuild your application. Because of this compatibility, your application is going to work just in the same manner. On the other hand, also, since it's a platform as a service, you can, after that, use some optimizations. For example, optimize costs. We are going to send you some recommendations on what you can do. Maybe choose, a smaller sized machine, for example. We are also going to do some security assessments, all kinds of things, where, of course, virtual machines don't offer you these features. So what is really SQL Database Managed Instance? It's just part of the Azure SQL Database family. It's a new flavor if you want. It is actually using the same infrastructure, which means that you can use the same tools, SQL Server Management Studio, Visual Studio, etc., etc. Same benefits, but it has the increased compatibility all the way down to SQL Server 2005. So now we are pretty much almost 100% compatible with SQL Server on-premise. And also it has full isolation and security. So in your enterprise, it can be important. We don't have any public IPs on this instance here. If you want to communicate with the database, you need express route or VPN connection, high security, full isolation, and like this, you basically your data is really safe with this solution. Like I mentioned earlier, it's more expensive than Azure SQL single instance, Azure SQL Database single instance, but the costs are transparent. Directly in the portal, you can see how much it's going to cost if I add CPU, if I add bandwidth, if I add capacity, and then like this, you can see it is also quite competitive, I should add. All right, so let's see the demo now. I'm going to migrate my products to my Azure SQL Database. So I'm going to go back to my website. All right. And here, as you can see, the SQL Server is on-premise. This is, again, a virtual machine. In fact, I have this machine opened here, so I connected to it. You see that it is an old version of Windows Server 2012. And this is going to be migrated to this SQL DB here, which at the moment is completely empty. So I don't have any tables here. I just created the database, but the tables are completely empty here. And so to do the migration, I'm going to go back to my database migration service. I'm going to go back to the root, and I'm going to create a new migration project, which I'm going to call this time MIG SQL. And I'm going to migrate from SQL Server to Azure SQL Database, but you see that I have some choice. I could also migrate to a managed instance, like I showed you before, or I could even migrate to a virtual machine if you wanted to take advantage of a VM, but here, like I said, we recommend going to PaaS rather. And here we again have the possibility to choose a type of activity. And here, because I'm going to an Azure SQL Database single instance, I'm going to start by migrating the schema. So it's a two-step migration if you want. So we'll do the schema first. I'm going to save that. And I'm going to create and run this activity. So now, again, I need to enter the source and the target. So for the source, this is my VM here. So I have the IP address here. I'm going to connect using SQL authentication with a username and a password. All right. I'm going to save that. So now the DMS is going to try to connect to my source, to my VM. Then I'm going to enter the information for the target. So I need the target server name, which, by the way, I can get from here, from the portal. So I'm going to copy that here. Voila. And then I'm going to do also SQL authentication, username, and password. Again, the DMS tries to connect to my target this time. And then it's going to ask me, which database do you want to migrate? So I say I want to migrate my Tailwind SQL database. The target is going to be my SQL DB here. I have another instance. And this is going to migrate the schema alone for now. So let's call that mig schema. I need to configure the validation options. Here for the demo, I'm not going to validate the database just for the sake of time, but you could also, of course, validate the database if you want to, which is probably a good idea when you do that in production. Okay, it's going to take a few seconds. You see that actually it was already created, so that's pretty good. Let's go back now, because now I need to migrate the data, and the data, I can do that in the same project because it is exactly the same source and the same target. But this time I'm going to create a new activity. And here I have the choice between online data migration or offline. So now we know what online means. It would be a no downtime migration where I don't need to worry about it. Here, for the shopping cart, it was important, so I put a stress on this. Here for the product, because I own both database, the source and the target, I can do an offline again. It's also for the sake of time because it's a little bit faster to configure that. So offline data migration. And of course, the source and the target are the same, so I just need to enter the password. Then I'm going to enter the password again for the target. All right. Here we go. Let's save that. And now again, it's going to ask me which database do you want to migrate. Voila, Tailwind SQL into my SQL DB. And now notice for even more security, I could set the source database to read-only, just to make sure that during the migration, nobody messes up with my products, because again, it's an offline data migration as opposed to the online, where those things are taken care of by the DMS directly. All right, I have my tables, 5 tables, so that's great. Let's save that, give a name. This time, this is mig data. Again, I need to configure the validation. I'm not going to validate for the sake of time. Let's run this migration. It's going to go quite fast. Of course, if you had terabytes or more, you know, it could take longer. In that case, it's a small database, so that is done. So now I'm going to go back to my app service portal, and I'm going to change the connection string. Let's go in Advanced Edit. Let's go down to my SQL connection string. You see that right now it is connecting to this VM using the IP address. I'm going to connect to the new one here. Let's paste that here. Let's click OK. Save. Same story, the web application is restarting. It takes just a minute, during which time I have time to show you a little bit more information about this SQL DB. So now I have this. You see that you have some nice graphs on the portal already, allowing you to check the health of your database, etc. And one thing we also have geo-replication here. So basically, this is more for backup purpose if you want to make sure that you're not going to lose data if one data center goes down for some reason, that your service is going to continue working, so you can configure this here. And like I told you, we have also a number of additional features in Platform as a Service that you can take advantage of. And my favorite is probably the advanced data security. So here we have the possibility to run some assessments on your data. This is going to run automatically, and it's going also to send you, for example, some emails. You can configure that in the portal if something suspect is detected. It's also going to run some vulnerability assessment. So you see that here in that case, I have a little bit of work to do because the service tells me that I have 3 failing checks, all right? And for example, I should probably enable auditing at the server level. This is always a good idea so that I have increased security. Server level firewall rules, right now I'm pretty much open to everyone because, you know, I didn't really pay attention to that too much. Well, here I have a good reminder that no, you need to be careful about that. So those assessments are going to run periodically, and then you will even get some emails, or your team can get some emails telling you should probably improve your situation here. All right, at this time, I think that my web application has restarted, so I'm going to refresh this. Now notice that the data is coming from my SQL Server, which is on Azure. Let's see if everything works fine. I can go back to Tailwind Trader, Power Tools, and here we see that my wooden commode is still here. This is great. So basically, everything's working just like expected. So now I can go into my CEO's office under his desk and pull down the cord because we don't need those VMs anymore. We can just remove those servers. Everything is on Azure now. All right. So again, we have some learn content here, so you can take advantage of this to learn how to work with relational data, in that case in Azure, gain some experience point. It's a very, very nice interactive experience that you have. I also want to talk a little bit more about those open source database engines. They are very popular. For example, PostgreSQL in particular, but also MySQL and MariaDB. So here you have the possibility to take your database running in one of those engines, put them in Azure Database using also the database migration service, for example. And then you have, of course, all the advantages of the cloud, of a platform as a service, for example, automatic backups, patching, security assessment that I showed you. This is all available there. You can also choose which framework you want to use to communicate with those databases. So it is a very nice offering that we have. PostgreSQL in particular is very, very popular these days. It's a possible alternative to Azure SQL Database if you want. And so we also support that on Azure, obviously. So that's a great choice that you have. If you want to know more about PostgreSQL on Azure, you can go to our documentation. We have docs.microsoft.com or just docs.com. And then you can look for PostgreSQL, and then you are going to see quite a lot of information about this. So a good place to learn. All right, so if I go back to our agenda, we saw that we have indeed more features than ever in our databases, including all the advantages of platform as a service, advanced data security, global replication, all these kind of things, nice monitoring of your database with some graphs and some nice dashboards. We have the services to help you migrate. Here I especially demonstrated the database migration service, but we also have the data migration assistant to do the assessment. And we are indeed global, reliable, and more secure than before, because now everything's running on a secured Azure data center where literally no one is on the floor most of the time, so you're sure that your servers are really well protected there. I want to show you some resources where you can learn more about those things and maybe get started. First of all, certification alert. You probably heard that a few times, but we're offering here free certifications. I'll have a QR code for you a little bit later. And so here at this address, you have the possibility to get certified as an Azure Data Engineer Associate, which is maybe a good place for you to think about, do I want to go even more into the cloud and take advantage of that, maybe to boost your career. Here is the free certification exam that I mentioned. So if you take a picture of this QR code, we are going to give you a voucher, and then you can take the exam for free. So that could be interesting as well. And here we have another learn alert, because once your data is in Azure, like I told you, by default, it's secure, it is encrypted by default, but you know you can always be more secure, and we have a whole track about securing your cloud data. I recommend you to check that out. Once you are migrated, it's always good to optimize your security even more, and so here we have this learn track, which is going to help you do that. So something really interesting as well. We have the Azure Cost Management Center, and so this is a place where you can go to optimize your resources. It's going to show you maybe you're not running at full capacity on a database. Maybe you can downgrade this database a little bit, pay a little bit less money. Maybe you can also scale up, scale down. You can configure that to save money. I also want to mention Azure Hybrid Benefits. That means that if you have some licenses for SQL Server on-premise, you can actually take advantage of that when you create the Azure SQL Database instance. There is a Save Money button. You can click on that and enter your licenses, and that's going to allow you to save quite a lot of money. Our accountants don't like this button, but please click it, because we love to pass you the benefits of that. So this is a good place to get started as well. And finally, if you want to get started and go and talk to your CFO, you might want to have a document on hand. And so here at the total cost of ownership calculator, the TCO, you have the possibility to build a case. You can enter your capacity, how many machines do you need, etc., etc., and then it's going to give you some estimate. We also give you a very nice PDF report where you can even put your own logo. So then you can say, look, I spent a whole week doing that work. It was a huge work. He doesn't need to know. This is between you and me, right? But actually, we help you do that very nicely. And like this, you can tell him, look, we are going to save money if we go to Azure. Azure Migrate, I mentioned that in the very beginning. This is our hub for everything migration, for guidance, where we give you some use cases, where we are going to give you some strategies for the migration, as well as some tools. So this is a good place to go and get the tools that you need. We can also connect you with some partners. We have a lot of experts, and this is not just for databases, but for anything migration, virtual machines, application services, web applications, etc., etc. So a great place to get started with a lot of resources. Again, the resource slide. So here you can find the slides of this session, but also some code which is going to allow you to deploy those resources that you just saw and try things out on your own subscription if you want to try how the database migration service works on a demo environment. So this is a good place to get started. And this is the end of the presentation. I want to mention a few upcoming sessions. MOD20, which is on Friday, is going to go and show you even more storage options in the cloud, for example, blob storage, file storage, etc., etc. That's a very nice session that my colleague Cecile is going to show here in the Chapin Theater. MOD10 already happened, so you cannot go and watch it today, but you can catch the recording, and that would be the first session of the learning path where we migrated the web applications to Azure. And finally, MOD30, which is today, coming up later after lunch, is going to show you how to enhance your web applications with cloud intelligence, adding features using, for example, serverless applications and cognitive services. I hope it was useful for you. If you want to connect with me, you can go to Twitter. Elbunion is my handle. And also, most of the time, I hang out at the debug bar, which is in the hub, in the Development and Architecture Center. So feel free to come and talk to me. Today, I'm a little bit busy because I have more session, but tomorrow I'll be here probably the whole day. Feel free to come and talk. I want to thank you so much for your attention. I really hope it was useful and that you liked the content. Please give us feedback so that we can always get better. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your attention and have a great day. Thank you.